A group of arrogant teenagers thought their next prank would be nothing more than teasing an old black man playing chess alone in the park. But when the old man reacted with an incredible calmness and unexpected strength, they realized he was anything but ordinary. Secrets about his past and experienced FBI agent began to surface, leading to lessons they never anticipated. Don't miss this captivating story of change and compassion. Follow to see how a group of reckless teens face valuable lessons from an unexpected mentor. The truth is deeper than it seems. The late afternoon sun filtered through the trees, casting dappled patterns of light and shadow on the ground. The park buzzed with the sounds of laughter and the rhythmic footsteps of people strolling by. Near the fountain, the old black man with salt and pepper hair sat at an aged wooden chess table, the pieces polished from years of use. His hands moved a chess piece carefully, his gaze thoughtful yet serene. The group of teens Tom, Jake, and Ricky approached with a swagger and smirks on their faces. They spotted the frail-looking old man sitting alone and thought it was the perfect chance for some amusement. Tom sneering, "Hey old man, playing chess by yourself. Couldn't find anyone patient enough to join you." Jake mockingly, "Or are you waiting for a pigeon to be your opponent? Maybe it'll bring you some luck." Ricky pretending to be serious, "Watch out, he might be a hidden chess king, just missing the crown." The old man said nothing, continuing to look at the board with a calm expression. When there was no reaction, Tom stepped closer, intending to flip the board as a final show of mockery. Tom teasingly, "Bet it takes you all day to come up with the next move, huh? Guess time doesn't matter much when you're that old." Before he could carry out his plan, Mr. David's strong hand grasped Tom's wrist, making him tremble and widen his eyes in shock. Tom, voice shaking, "Frightened, sir. Please. I wasn't going to do anything. I'm sorry." Jake and Ricky fell silent, their eyes filled with confusion and surprise. None of them expected an old man to have such strength. Mr. David, looking directly into Tom's eyes, voice deep and steady, "You think it's fun to pick on others? Do you know their story, who they are, or what they've been through?" The group froze, unable to respond. The atmosphere grew heavy. Mr. David released Tom's wrist, but his eyes held their serious gaze. Mr. David, continuing, "Racism, prejudice, they all come from ignorance, from not taking the time to understand others. You look at the surface and think you know everything. But the truth is, every person carries their own story, their own pain and memories you can't see." Ricky looked down, a shiver running down his spine. Jake sighed, his expression conflicted. They had never considered what Mr. David had just said, had never put themselves in someone else's shoes. The arrogance in their hearts was slowly replaced by a sense of regret. Tom softly, "Remorseful, sir. I'm sorry, I didn't think about that." Mr. David looking at Tom, a gentle smile forming on his lips. "Apologizing is the first step to making things right. But what's more important is learning to treat others with respect and compassion." A moment of silence passed, and the teenagers felt a slight weight lift from their hearts. They weren't sure what to do next, but one thing was certain: they would never look at Mr. David or anyone else the same way again. Ricky whispering to Jake, "We learned something today, didn't we?" Jake nodded, his eyes reflecting a newfound awareness in the evening glow. What started as a prank had turned into a profound lesson on humanity, empathy, and the importance of not judging others by their appearance. The next day, early sunlight filtered through the lush green branches, casting rays onto the damp ground still marked by the previous night's rain. The park was quieter, with only the sound of birds singing in the crisp morning air. The trio Tom, Jake, and Ricky returned to the park. They no longer had their usual cocky demeanor. Instead, they were deep in thought. The feelings from their encounter with Mr. David still resonated with them. Tom, who seemed the most affected, sat on a nearby bench watching Mr. David from afar. The old man was there again, calmly moving the chess pieces on the worn board. Tom couldn't shake the words from the day before. They echoed in his mind, stirring something inside him. Ricky glancing at Tom, asking softly, "Why are we here, Tom? Wasn't yesterday enough?" Tom looking down, voice low, "I don't know. But something inside me said we needed to come back." Jake, usually the quietest of the group, stepped forward and looked at Mr. David. His gaze was a mix of curiosity and a touch of guilt. Mr. David looked up, meeting Jake's eyes, and smiled slightly, as if he had known they would return. Mr. David gesturing invitingly, voice warm, "Come, have a seat, boys. Despite their hesitation, the group moved closer and sat down across from him. Tom looked up, trying to find the right words, but Mr. David spoke first. Mr. David, what do you think strength really is? All three were silent, exchanging uncertain glances. The pause stretched, like a vast space between them. Finally, Jake spoke up, his voice small but clear. Jake, I think strength is the ability to protect yourself and others. But I don't know how to do that the right way. Mr. David nodding, eyes filled with understanding. Protection is part of strength, but it isn't everything. When I was an agent, I used to believe that just being strong enough to defeat your enemy would solve everything. But I learned that true strength is knowing when to use it and when you don't have to. Ricky hesitantly asked, did you ever face a moment like that? When you had to choose between fighting and holding back? Mr. David looked at Ricky with eyes that seemed to see right through him, not with judgment, but with deep understanding. He sighed, his gaze drifting to a distant memory. Mr. David, there was a time I stood face to face with someone holding a gun, his eyes filled with desperation. I knew that if I acted, I could win, but he would lose his life, and those I was trying to protect would witness the horror. I chose to stay still, to listen and find another way. In the end, I didn't need to fire a shot and still managed to save everyone. The group looked at Mr. David, a sense of respect replacing their earlier shame. Tom lowered his head, his voice rough with emotion. Tom, yesterday, I was wrong. I thought teasing and bullying others made me stronger, but now I'm not so sure. Mr. David smiling, placing a hand on Tom's shoulder. Recognizing your mistake is the first step. True strength lies in facing it and choosing to change. Everyone has their own story, and what makes us truly strong is taking the time to understand others. A moment of silence enveloped them. The teenagers felt something deeper, a lesson they hadn't considered before. The heaviness in their hearts began to lift, replaced by a determination to change how they saw and treated others. Ricky whispering, but with conviction, I want to learn more about that kind of strength, Mr. David. Mr. David nodding, eyes bright with hope. Then stay and listen, boys. This is just the beginning. The sun rose higher, bathing the park in a golden light. The trees around them shimmered in the glow, as if witnessing something special unfold. The group, Tom, Jake, and Ricky, sat across from Mr. David, eyes attentive like children hearing an important story for the first time. Mr. David glancing at the chessboard, voice calm. Strength doesn't come from the ability to hurt someone, but from the restraint and the choice not to. I'll teach you about that through stories and lessons I've learned. The group sat in silence, waiting. Mr. David moved a knight on the board and looked up, his eyes distant as though seeing a different time. Mr. David, I once faced men who had nothing left to lose, people who saw only darkness. One time, I met a man who had been through so much tragedy that he lost everything. When he raised his gun and shouted, I knew that his pain was greater than his hatred. Tom furrowed his brow, a strange feeling stirring inside him. He remembered times when he lashed out at friends just because he felt hurt or disrespected. Mr. David's story brought those memories rushing back. Tom, voice low, introspective, so what did you do? Did you shoot? Mr. David with a sad smile, no, I didn't shoot. I lowered my gun and said to him, I'm here to listen to you, not to hurt you, and that made him pause. Sometimes, understanding and compassion are more powerful than any weapon. Ricky glanced at Tom and Jake, his eyes wide with surprise and emotion. He had never thought that strength could be shown by handling a difficult situation with patience and kindness. Jake softly, so, not everything has to be solved by fighting or showing off strength. Mr. David nodding, exactly. I want you all to understand that true strength lies in patience, self-control, and compassion for others. If you rely solely on violence to prove yourself, you become a prisoner of your own anger and fear. Tom's face was thoughtful. But how do you stay calm when everything around you is chaos? I've lost control before and always regretted it. Mr. David sat up straighter, his hands lightly touching a chess piece in front of him. Mr. David, staying calm comes from realizing that not everything needs an immediate reaction. Like in chess, you need to consider each move before acting. Anyone can learn this through practice and time. Ricky, with a determined look at Mr. David, can you teach us how to do that? I want to learn. Mr. David smiling and nodding, of course. But the first lesson isn't on the chessboard. It's in learning to listen to yourself and to others. We'll start by understanding and sharing our own stories. The group looked at one another, feeling a shift within themselves. They began to realize that strength wasn't just muscle or aggression, it was the ability to control oneself, be patient, and show kindness. Mr. David's eyes glimmered under the midday sun, as if he were planting seeds of understanding and hope within them. Jake whispering with a small smile, maybe today we've started learning how to be stronger without fighting. Mr. David with a warm tone, yes, boys. And this is just the beginning. The next morning, the park remained peaceful under the gentle morning sun. Birds sang from the treetops, their melodies weaving through the rustling leaves, creating a soothing harmony. Tom, Jake, and Ricky returned, carrying new thoughts from yesterday's lesson. Their hearts no longer brimmed with arrogance but with eagerness and respect. As they approached, Mr. David was already seated at the chess table, his calloused hands carefully arranging the pieces. His eyes lit up with joy when he saw them return, not with swagger but with curiosity and humility. Mr. David smiling, today, we're not just going to talk about strength but also gratitude and understanding. Are you ready? The three nodded. Tom stepped forward, sincerity replacing the usual defiance in his eyes. Tom quietly, sir, I want to apologize for everything we did. I thought bullying others made me stronger, but now I know that was a mistake. Mr. David nodding, eyes full of compassion, recognizing a mistake and wanting to change takes courage. I'll show you how gratitude and patience can transform your life. Jake earnestly, how do we start, sir? Mr. David looking at each boy, speaking gently, we start by learning to observe and listen. To understand others, you need to realize that you're not the center of every story. Think of a time when you saw someone struggling or feeling sad and did nothing to help. The group fell silent, reflecting. Ricky lowered his head as a memory surfaced, his mother, working tirelessly at the convenience store all day, too exhausted to smile. He remembered how he never helped her, wrapped up in his own youthful selfishness. Ricky voice thick with emotion, I think about my mom. She works so hard, but I never really thought to help her or tell her I'm grateful. Mr. David looking at Ricky, voice warm, gratitude isn't just words, it's action. When you act from gratitude, you'll find that true strength isn't in improving yourself but in helping others. Tom's eyes brightened with a new resolve. He thought about the younger kids at school who he and his friends had picked on. Jake, who rarely showed emotion, also felt a shift within him. He thought of his younger brother, who he often ignored even though he knew how much attention he needed. Jake turning to Ricky and Tom, we need to do something. Not just say we will, but really do something that matters. Mr. David smiling, nodding approvingly, exactly. Change starts with small acts. You'll see that each small action can make a big difference. The boys exchanged glances, a shared understanding growing between them. This was more than a lesson, it was a new beginning. The park, bathed in the gentle morning sun, seemed to glow brighter, as if bearing witness to this quiet but profound transformation. That afternoon, the teenagers decided to split up and do acts of kindness. Tom returned home and approached his little sister to apologize for the times he had raised his voice at her. Ricky helped his mother clean up the store, and she looked at him with surprised, joyful eyes. Jake, seeing his younger brother sitting alone, joined him in a game of chess, a gesture he'd never made before. The sound of laughter and simple, heartfelt acts filled the park and their homes, like a small flame beginning to spread. Gratitude not only soothed their regrets but sparked new hope. Tom speaking to Jake and Ricky after a long day, maybe Mr. David was right. True strength isn't what we do for ourselves, but how we help and change those around us. The group agreed, genuine smiles appearing on their faces without a trace of arrogance. In the fading light of the evening, Mr. David watched from a distance, a satisfied smile playing on his lips as he saw the seeds he planted start to sprout. A new day began, and the park buzzed with playful chatter, but there was something different in the air. The trio, Tom, Jake, and Ricky, returned to meet Mr. David, brimming with eagerness. They weren't there just to listen, they wanted to learn more deeply. Today, they were ready to explore how to control their emotions and discipline themselves. Mr. David smiling as they approached, you've come back. Good. Today we'll talk about emotional control and how to use strength responsibly. The boys sat down, eyes fixed on him with attention. Mr. David looked at them warmly, no longer bearing the stern look from before, but a confidence that these boys could change. Mr. David, you now know that strength isn't in fists or words that tear others down. Today, I'll teach you some basic self-defense moves. But remember, the most important thing is to use them only for protection, not aggression. Tom, who had once been hot-headed, felt a wave of relief as he listened. He remembered the countless times he acted impulsively and caused trouble. He now understood that learning to restrain himself and protect others wasn't just a sign of strength, it was a responsibility. Ricky smiling, "I want to learn, sir. But not to fight, just to know how to stay calm when things get tough." Mr. David nodding with satisfaction, "That's the spirit I want you all to have. Let's begin." He taught the group simple moves, from defensive stances to agile movements and maintaining balance. Each motion was repeated until the boys understood the finer details. But more importantly, Mr. David explained the meaning behind each step. He emphasized that being prepared physically went hand in hand with mental clarity and emotional control. The boys practiced diligently, finding that the lessons were not just about movements but about internalizing patience and mindfulness. As they worked, they could sense that they were becoming stronger not just in body but in character. Mr. David, while guiding them, "Remember, this move isn't for attacking but for defending. When you face a tense situation, keeping calm is your top priority. Your body listens to your heart, and your heart must listen to reason." Jake, with intense concentration, started to realize that restraint required a much greater strength than using his fists. He thought about the time when his little brother cried after being bullied, and he didn't know how to help. He understood that protecting others wasn't just about action, it was about being a steady presence, a source of trust and support. Jake looking at Mr. David, determination in his eyes, "Sir, how do we stay calm when we're provoked?" Mr. David meeting Jake's gaze, "Remember, the one who stays calm has already won the first battle. When you're provoked, take a deep breath, focus on your breathing, and don't let emotions overpower reason. This kind of restraint isn't easy, but if you practice, it becomes instinct." Tom felt the anger he used to feel when mocked by friends and his desire to prove himself through aggression. But now he understood that true strength was the ability to remain calm and in control. An unexpected challenge in the afternoon, just as the lesson ended. An older group of teenagers appeared in the park, their expressions cocky and their words taunting. They approached Tom and his friends, clearly looking for trouble. Tom's heart raced, his fists clenching involuntarily, but Mr. David's teachings echoed in his mind. One teen from the group mocking, "Hey kids, what's this? Learning moves from the old man to play around." Ricky glanced at Tom, waiting for his response. Jake stepped forward, his voice steady and calm. Jake with composure, "Firmly, we're not looking for trouble. If you need space, we'll move." Jake's calmness stunned the group for a moment. Tom unclenched his fists, took a deep breath, and felt the impulse to react melt away. The older teenagers hesitated before eventually leaving, and a sense of peace returned. Mr. David watching from a distance, smiling with pride, "You did well. That's real strength." Ricky smiling lightly, feeling proud, "I think we really learned what you meant by strength." As the sun set, casting a warm orange glow over the park, the scene felt serene. Birds flew back to their nests, leaving the sky streaked with fading light. Under the large oak tree, Mr. David sat watching Tom, Jake, and Ricky as they helped younger kids arrange the chessboard and taught them how to play. The laughter and joy in their eyes warmed his heart. Ricky kneeling down, guiding a younger child, "You shouldn't just think about your next move, you have to plan a few steps ahead. That's how you become smarter, not just in the game but in life too." Nearby, Jake recounted the story of how he managed to stay calm during the encounter with the older teens. His voice carried a tone of pride but without boasting, capturing the children's attention and admiration. Tom, who once led the group in mischief, was now helping a boy tie his shoelaces, sharing the lessons on gratitude he had learned from Mr. David. Tom, with a gentle smile, speaking to the boy, "You know, being strong isn't about showing you're better than others. It's about helping others feel they're not left behind." Mr. David watching from a distance, pride glowing in his eyes, "They've come to understand what I hope to teach. They're not just learning to defend themselves or control their tempers, they're learning to share and pass on that strength." He stood up and walked toward the group, his steps slow but sure. The boys looked up as he approached, wide smiles spreading across their faces. Jake running over, voice full of excitement, "Mr. David, today we helped the kids play chess and told them what you taught us." Mr. David smiling, nodding, "That's wonderful. I couldn't be happier knowing you're not just keeping the lessons for yourselves but sharing them. That's a sign of true growth." Ricky hesitant, "Mr. David, why do you spend your time teaching us all of this?" You could just sit here and enjoy the quiet without a care. Mr. David, eyes thoughtful, voice measured. When I was young, I was like you boys, impulsive, proud, and sometimes careless. But I was fortunate to have mentors who guided me and changed my life. Now, I just want to pass on what I received to see those seeds grow in the next generation. A profound silence enveloped the group. Tom, who had changed the most from these lessons, felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. He stepped forward and hugged Mr. David, a gesture full of sincerity and respect. Tom's voice choked with emotion. Thank you, Mr. David. I promise I'll always remember what you taught us. Mr. David, patting Tom's shoulder. I know you will, Tom. I believe all of you will. The park sky was turning dark, stars beginning to twinkle above. The teenagers sat with Mr. David under the old oak tree, talking and laughing. The lessons were no longer just words, they had become a part of their lives. Jake, gazing at the night sky, voice quiet. Mr. David, I think each of those stars up there is like a lesson you've shared with us, and I promise we'll keep them shining. Mr. David, smiling warmly, eyes kind. Then keep doing what's right, boys. Never forget, the greatest strength lies in kindness and restraint. They had learned to be strong not only through actions but by living responsibly and with love. The seeds Mr. David had planted were starting to grow, promising a future filled with hope and goodness. 2 weeks passed since that heartfelt afternoon in the park. Life for Tom, Jake, and Ricky had changed noticeably. Mr. David's lessons weren't just fleeting memories, they had taken root, shaping the boys' thoughts and actions, leading to clear, positive changes. Today, the boys decided to return to the park to meet Mr. David, not just to talk but to share their stories of what they had accomplished. When they arrived, they saw him sitting under the big oak tree, the old wooden chessboard before him, his eyes lighting up with curiosity as he saw them approach with bright smiles. Mr. David, smiling, voice warm. Hello, boys. You look more radiant than the last time. Tell me what's happened. Tom, taking a deep breath, voice excited. Sir, I've changed. I don't get into fights at school anymore. Instead, I've been focusing on my studies and joined the school's soccer team. People even say I might become captain if I keep this up. Mr. David nodded, his eyes gleaming with joy as he listened to Tom. The once arrogant boy had found a way to express himself without aggression. Ricky, smiling, voice filled with emotion. I've changed too, Mr. David. I help my mom around the house and spend time assisting her whenever I can. She smiles more now and doesn't seem as tired as before. I've never seen her so happy. Mr. David, looking at Ricky, eyes gentle. You've learned gratitude, and that's the greatest strength for building strong relationships. Jake, hesitant but proud. I've started spending more time with my little brother, not ignoring him anymore. We play chess together and read stories before bed. Our relationship has improved a lot. Mr. David's expression softened as he heard Jake's story. The changes these boys spoke of were proof that the lessons of compassion, patience, and understanding were taking root in their lives. He saw the boys not just as students but as young men growing into figures who could inspire others. Mr. David looked at all three with eyes full of emotion, aged but brimming with hope. The boys before him were no longer the arrogant, impulsive teens they once were, but young men who cared and understood. Mr. David, smiling, voice warm. You've grown so much. I'm proud of you. Remember, the right path always requires patience and compassion. But if you keep walking this path, you won't just change yourselves, you'll inspire others as well. Tom, nodding, eyes bright. Sir, I promise we'll always hold on to your lessons and share them with others. No one has to live in the shadow of anger and hate. Ricky, with a confident smile, will help other kids at school understand that too. The sun sank lower, painting the sky orange and casting a golden glow over the park. Mr. David stood up, looking at the three boys with unhidden pride. Mr. David, gazing toward the horizon, voice gentle. Continue to live by what you've learned. The greatest strength isn't in showing off but in the peace within and the ability to spread kindness. The teenagers sat back down under the oak tree, sharing more stories and talking about their plans for the future. They were no longer just kids who bullied and teased, they were young people full of potential and compassion. Jake, looking at Mr. David with gratitude. We'll always remember you, sir. You changed our lives. Mr. David, nodding, eyes glistening. I only pointed the way. You're the ones who chose to walk it. Night fell, but inside them, the light of hope and understanding shone brightly. The park was no longer just a place for playing, it had witnessed a journey of transformation, a place where compassion had taken root and spread, touching every part of their lives. They left the park with hearts full of joy, knowing this was only the beginning of a brighter future. If this story inspired you, remember that the power to change starts with a single choice. Choose kindness, choose understanding, and choose to be a positive force in someone else's life. Just like Tom, Jake, and Ricky, you have the power to make a difference. Share this message, spread compassion, and be the light that helps others find their way. Subscribe for more stories that remind us of the strength and empathy and the importance of lifting each other up. Let's build a world where true strength is measured by our capacity for kindness.